Robert Williams sat in his small kitchen, sipping his morning coffee. He was a 62-year-old jazz pianist, retired from the New York music scene and living a quiet life in his modest Brooklyn home. His wife, Elena, brought him a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice. "You have a visitor," said Elena with a smile. Robert looked up from his coffee. A young woman stood in the doorway, her face lit with a mix of nervousness and excitement. "Mr. Williams, I'm Sarah. I host a music history podcast. Your music has been my obsession for years," she said eagerly. Robert chuckled. "My music? Nobody listens to my music." Sarah shook her head. "That's where you're wrong. Your songs have millions of streams online. They are considered classics." Robert was stunned. He had no idea that his music continued to resonate with people. It had been 30 years since his manager, Victor Morty, told him that his albums were selling dismally. Robert had accepted it without a fight, believing him all along. But now, as he looked at the streaming numbers on Sarah's laptop, he realized how wrong he had been. His songs were indeed classics, and they were being enjoyed by millions of people worldwide. However, he was still living in poverty. "Victor told me that nobody cares," said Robert. "Who is Victor?" asked Sarah. Elena placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. "You need to check your old contracts, dear. Perhaps you have the originals in your possession." Robert spent the next few hours rummaging through the dusty attic, searching for any documents that might contain vital information. He unearthed old photographs, yellowed letters, and crumpled recording notes from his past performances. Finally, he found a folder with his name on it in his handwriting. Robert opened the folder, and his heart raced. It was the contract he had signed with Victor Morty. Robert's eyes scanned the document, and he remembered the day he signed it. Victor had promised him 60% of the royalties from his songs. Robert looked at the streaming numbers on Sarah's laptop one last time. If Victor was paying him 60% of the royalties, he would have been a millionaire many times over. Instead, he was living in poverty. Something was wrong, and Robert was determined to find out what. "I need to see Victor's copy of the contract," said Robert. "Something is not right, Elena." "I know it." "I'll help you," said Elena. That night, Robert could not fall asleep. His mind was racing with thoughts of Victor and the 30 years of his life that had been wasted on him. Robert had been betrayed and taken advantage of, and he was done being a victim. He made a silent promise to himself that Victor would pay for what he had done. The next morning, Robert arrived at Victor's office for the first time in 30 years. The building was tall and imposing, a stark contrast to Robert's humble home. Robert was led to Victor's office on the top floor, which had a magnificent view of the city. Victor greeted Robert warmly and gave him a tight hug. He looked as successful as ever, with a silver comb in his hair and a fine suit. His office smelled of expensive leather. "Robert, it's been a long time," said Victor. "How have you been?" "I'm fine, Victor. I need to see my old contracts," replied Robert. Victor's smile faded. Of course. Let me get them from the archives." Victor called his secretary and spoke to her in hushed tones. He led Robert to a different room and handed him a file. Robert opened it and began reading the contract that Victor had submitted to the music company. Everything seemed to be in order. It was the same contract that Robert had signed. However, as he read through it, Robert noticed something was wrong. There was an additional clause that stated that Victor owned all the publishing rights to Robert's songs permanently. Robert's heart raced as he realized what this meant. Victor had been keeping all the royalties from his songs for himself. Robert was furious but kept his cool. "Everything looks good," said Robert. Victor smiled. "Good, good. I'm glad." Robert left the office and got into his car, his hands trembling with rage. Victor had stolen 30 years of his life, and it was time to take him down. Robert drove to the public library and spent the next few days studying music copyright law. He knew he needed to understand the intricacies of the music industry to take on Victor. However, the more he read, the more he realized he needed help with someone who had experience with music copyright issues. That evening, Robert called Mr. Henderson, a renowned lawyer who specialized in music copyright cases. Mr. Henderson was a serious man with a sharp gaze and a deep voice. "Robert, do you have any original documents?" asked Mr. Henderson. "Yes, I have my old demo recordings and handwritten lyrics," said Robert. "Good, good. Original materials can help prove authorship of the works. We need to be careful not to tip off Victor that we are onto him," said Mr. Henderson. Robert agreed. He would not confront Victor directly, but would instead gather all the evidence he needed to take him down. Over the next 2 weeks, Robert spent every waking moment in his attic, sifting through old papers, searching for anything that could help. One night, Elena found Robert sitting on the floor in the attic, surrounded by papers. "You look tired, honey," said Elena. Robert looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "Elena, I wrote all of this. All of these songs are mine. Victor stole them from me." Elena sat beside Robert and took his hand. "Then let's take them back, honey." Robert nodded. For the first time in 30 years, he felt a glimmer of hope. He knew he had to do this, and he was not alone. Robert knew he needed more than just documents to take Victor down. He needed him to confess publicly. Mr. Henderson suggested Robert set up a dinner with Victor and record his confession. Robert agreed. He called Victor and invited him to dinner. Victor arrived at the restaurant and ordered a bottle of expensive wine. "I've been thinking about the old times," said Robert. "Remember when we signed that contract? You told me I would get 60% of the royalties from my songs." Victor laughed. "Of course, I remember. Those were the good old days." Robert pulled out the contract and showed it to Victor. "But the contract you submitted to the music company said that you owned all the publishing rights to my songs." Victor's smile faded. "Contracts change as time goes on, Robert. You should know that." "My signature did not change, Victor," said Robert. "But the contract did. Someone added the clause that stated that you owned all the publishing rights to my songs." Victor's face contorted with rage. "Listen to me, Robert. You're a nobody. I made you famous. Without me, you would be playing jazz in the streets. I made those songs, Victor. Every note came from my heart. I have demo recordings and handwritten lyrics to prove it," said Robert. Victor chuckled. "Who is going to believe you? I'm a renowned music producer with a stellar reputation. You're just a washed-up jazz pianist with delusions of grandeur." Robert's heart sank. Victor was right. No one would believe him. But he did not realize that Robert had recorded their conversation. The tiny recorder in his pocket had captured every word Victor said. Later that night, Robert met with Mr. Henderson to review the recording. "This is fantastic, Robert. We have enough evidence to take Victor down," said Mr. Henderson. 2 days later, Victor was served with a court order. He had been accused of fraud, forgery, and theft of royalties from Robert Williams. The music industry was buzzing with the news, and other musicians were coming forward with their allegations against Victor. Victor tried to destroy the evidence, but Robert had copies of all the documents, and the recording of their conversation was proof enough of Victor's guilt. The case garnered widespread media attention, and newspapers ran feature stories about the legendary pianist and the deceitful music producer. One evening, Victor called Robert. "I can give you money, Robert. Name your price." "All I want is my songs, Victor," said Robert. Victor screamed in frustration. "Not me. You destroyed yourself." Robert hung up the phone and looked at Elena. She was smiling. The battle was far from over, but Robert had taken the first step in his quest for justice. The courtroom was silent as Robert Williams took the stand. He was dressed in a navy suit and had his salt and pepper hair slicked back. Across the room, Victor Morty looked pale and drawn. Robert's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, began his questioning. "Mr. Williams, could you tell the court about these documents?" Robert presented the documents to the court. Every page told a story of his life and music. The jury members listened intently as Robert described how he had written every song and how Victor had stolen them from him. The next witness was the recording of Robert's conversation with Victor. The jury watched as Robert played the recording for the court. Victor's voice was heard saying that he had taken all the royalties from Robert's songs. The jury members looked at Victor, who was now sweating profusely. "These songs are my life's work," said Robert. "Every note came from my heart. Victor stole them from me, but he will never take them again. Music is a part of who we are, and it cannot be stolen." The jury deliberated for 2 hours before returning a verdict. Victor Morty was found guilty of fraud and forgery and ordered to return all the rights to Robert Williams and pay him $4 million in royalties. As the judge read out the ruling, Victor was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. The press swarmed around Robert, but he was unfazed. He had fought for what was right, and he had won. That evening, Robert sat in his small kitchen, sipping a glass of wine. He looked out the window at the city skyline and smiled to himself. He had fought for his music, and he had won. But the victory was bittersweet. He knew that his music would always be a part of him, and he would never let anyone take it from him again. Sometimes the sweetest victory is the one that takes the longest to come, said Robert in his final statement to the court. He placed his hand on the piano one last time and played his favorite song. The music filled the room, and Robert smiled, tears streaming down his face.